All right.
All right, well, welcome everyone. We're glad to have you here for our third and our final installment in our look into evidence-based practices. We have Dave Clausen back along with Nicole Luciani, and it's going to be a great capstone to our training. Dave has assured me that everyone here is going to walk away with newfound wisdom and understanding. So that's all we asked for when we asked him to come back to the PTTC and do this training for us. So we're all in for a treat, if you will. I'm Steve Miller. I'm the director for Mid-America PTTC, and we are funded by Samson, and they advise us to always say that while they do love what we do and they do fund what we produce, they don't necessarily endorse the content that is presented here today. But I assure you that we will not lead you astray, and they'd be proud to be associated with this. Next slide, please. So we are actually housed in Missouri. ACT Missouri is our parent organization, and they have been delivering training and technical assistance at the grassroots level for about 30 years now. And Chuck was a young man when he started this way back when, and has been with ACT Missouri for about 20 of those years, haven't you, Chuck?
14.
14 of those. So Chuck is the executive director for ACT Missouri, and we do believe that we're here to build community. And I actually used our tagline today, Dave, when I did a presentation at the community level, because we are stronger together when we partnership that way. Next slide, please. We want to try to have everyone adhere to the fact that we like to use affirming language, and we do believe, and I wholeheartedly understand, that words have power. And let's put people first. We're going to practice affirming language to promote the application of evidence-based and culturally informed practices. And a couple of upcoming events that we have a week from today, if you'd like to get a little bit more of Dave Clausen's knowledge. He actually is going to lead us in our community of practice for our Leadership Institute. And he's doing a capstone on evidence-based practices today, and he's doing the capstone on a 4-part series on workforce development on September 15th. If you'd like to be a part of that, it's over the noon hour. So bring your sack lunch and join us for a conversation about overextension. So that's going to be a fantastic opportunity to learn more about how to develop yourself, I guess is the best way to say that. And then on September 13th, which is next Tuesday, if you are a Missouri resident and you would be interested in learning more about drug endangered children, we begin a 7-part series called the DEC Academy. And we'd like to have you in the audience if you are a resident of the state of Missouri. Next slide. I think we know about Zoom, but please keep your microphone muted. Dave has already mentioned once, but those that have come in since then, this is going to be a little more interactive than the last 2 sessions. So cameras on and mics at the ready should we have some lively conversation happening today. If you do need some technical assistance, identify myself or either Nicole or Dave if one of them's not speaking, and we can try to help troubleshoot whatever your needs happen to be. The chat function for me is at the lower part of the screen, and I don't know if we're doing any annotating today, but if so, we'll walk you through that as we get started. And last but not least, got a slide at the end, huh? Okay. Please stick around until the end. No, that's fine. You can go to the next slide. Stick around till the end. We will have an evaluation that we'd like for you to spend about 3 minutes of your time fulfilling. We call it the GIPRA. And they will put a slide up on the screen. You can take a snapshot with your cellular device. There'll be a QR code, and I will drop a link in the chat as well. But we'd like you to spend a few moments to fill out that evaluation so Samson knows who was in our audience and if they are leaving with any positive feedback or new learned ideas. So happy that you're here. Welcome again, everyone. And I'll turn it over to Dave and Nicole.
Hey, all right. So yes, the September 15th Leadership Institute Community of Practice. We're going to be talking about how in prevention we are all leaders. Doesn't matter your role or your position. And so as we deepen our understanding of self, how we show up, both in our normal natural state, but then also when we're overextended, a little stressed out, how that can impact how we lead, how we interact with others, and then also gain some more insight into how others might be showing up and what they need when they are also overextended or stressed. So it's about figuring out how we as individuals can bring our A game, but then also help our team, our partners, our members bring their A game as well. And it's going to be a great conversation as well, just like today is going to be. All right. So good to see everybody. I recognize some names. Here we are, session number 3 to talk about evidence based practices, the implementation with fidelity and sustainability. All right, I am Dave Clausen. As you know, met several of y'all when I was actually in Steve's seat not too terribly long ago. I've since stepped out on my own at DJC Solutions, where really trying to just operate as a modern day consulting company that ultimately connects driven individuals and organizations to optimal performance and really connecting them and meeting them where they are to uplift them and empower them to pursue and achieve real change, whether that be as individuals, as organizations, or for their community as well. And I could go on, but hey, it's all about connecting others to sustainable habits, aligned experiences, and that next level of excellence for the optimal and fulfilling lifestyle. I'm joined today by Nicole Luciani. Oh, Nicole, would you do me the honor and just introduce yourself, please?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thanks, Dave. I think we can all agree that Dave's energy is very refreshing after the lunch hour. Like, yes, give me that. Hey, everybody, I'm Nicole Luciani. I'm joining you from SAMHSA Center for the uh, Substance Abuse and Prevention. um, so I am working in knowledge management and training there, but I have been a long time preventionist and formerly worked for the Center for the Application of Prevention Technologies, the CAP system, before they turned into the amazing PTCs. And I am just really happy to be here today. We're going to get started here in just a second. But please feel free to type out any questions that you might have or thoughts that you might have in the chat box along the way. David said this at the very early start that we would like to have as much of a discussion and dialogue with you all as we can. So definitely welcome your participation.
Yes, indeed, because prevention is better together. All right. So what we're going to do today, we're going to recap session 2 and also a little bit from session 1. We're going to talk about fidelity pitfalls and how to avoid them a little bit. And yeah, when it comes to adaptations, we're going to unpack what that means, what to do, what kind of adaptations are good. Green light adaptations. What about those yellow light, the in between? I don't know. And of course, those red light adaptations. Then lastly, how do we want to monitor implementation and how all of this leads to sustainability? But as you all likely know, prevention is better together, and we really want to live that and build community. So we want to just do a quick little round of breakouts and just introduce yourself to those that you're in your breakout room and just share. Are you team pumpkin spice or apple cider? And of course, you can always go for something else as well. What is your fall drink of choice? All right, just gonna have a little fun to get things started. All right, so I'm gonna put you in there for just a quick little 5 minutes with a quick 30-second countdown. Just a chance to get to know each other a little bit to start this conversation off. More folks are still chatting. Right. So I put together a poll, not on Team Pumpkin Spice or Apple Cider, but got a poll for you. All right, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully that was just a little light, fun conversation to get things started. Maybe sparked a new connection across the 4-state Mid-America region, or even the country, as well as we often have folks from all over attend. We're not going to debrief this one, but we've got some more breakouts in store. But I am curious who attended our last sessions. So there's a link in the chat box to Woo Clap. You can click that link. You can scan this QR code with your phone, or as you can see, you can text to respond to this poll. Give you a moment to get it all opened up. All right. So let's see what you got. Did you attend either of our last sessions? Who's here with us today? All right. Awesome. Glad you're back, Samantha. Attended both. Okay. All right. Give y'all a few more moments. Just wanted to know who's in the audience before we really get into unpacking implementation with fidelity and sustainability. All right. Looks like we've got a healthy mix. I think we can speak to all the different folks here today, Nicole. Think we got what we need? Think so? Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
All right, groovy. Well, we'll come back to Woo Clap for another poll here in a few, but let's get started. We're going to take that quick look, just a quick look at our past sessions, and I am continuing the trend using cute dog photos as well for today. So just quick reminder, what does it mean to mean evidence-based? Well, it's got evidence of effectiveness. It's been found to be effective under the specific set of circumstances. Experts, folks way smarter than me, agree that an intervention is evidence-based if it's included in a federal registry, if it's reported in peer-reviewed journals, or if it's got that documented effectiveness as well that's supported by other information. So that's what we're going to continue talking about today. So we talked about the two pillars of intervention success, that first being appropriate selection of evidence-based programs, policies, and or practices. A few things to consider: the evidence of effectiveness, the conceptual fit, and the practical fit. Talked about evidence of effectiveness. So conceptual fit, that again, these are pulled out of the logic model. Remember a logic model. We're going to be talking about that a couple different times today because we love a good logic model. Conceptual fit, though, is which strategy addresses the contributing factors. Does it reduce those risk factors or increase the protective factors? All right. This is what that looks like here. Practical fit, is it appropriate for the community and the current capacity? What do we got going on? And the logic model, this is where it's all at. The logic model is going to lead you to selecting the prevention strategies after you know the other components. It is your roadmap. This is your go-to, where you want to start when it comes to identifying the best fit strategies. Forgot about the animations. All right, so going through the logic model, it's going to lead to appropriate selection. The second pillar is implementation fidelity. We're going to unpack that a little bit more today as well. What is fidelity? Well, just want you to remember that there's a range of fidelity requirements. Some programs, some practices, some policies require very precise adherence to the curriculum or implementation protocol, and others, they may allow for a little more flexibility. But when selecting the strategy, or excuse me, when the selected strategy isn't implemented with fidelity, that's going to reduce the likelihood of achieving the outcomes and thus reducing sustainability as well. When it comes to the core elements, boom, we got all three right here: the content, the delivery mechanism, and the method. This is how you can make meaningful change. You can retain those core components. You have to balance the need for the real world fit and high fidelity. But the core components are not always apparent. And we're going to actually unpack that a little bit more as well. We're going to dive into that. And then when it comes to retaining those core components, here's what you want to look at: preserve the setting, maintain the dosage, add new content, and then those adaptations, those design or delivery changes, got to do those with intention and with care as well. And yes, y'all will get these slides after today's session. I'm sure Steve will send them out with the recording, so no worries there. We'll get them to you. All right, so those core components, think of them as interventions rocks. And think about the core elements in this manner. A teacher comes into a classroom with a big glass jar, and they set it on the desk. Y'all may have seen this on YouTube or TikTok, if it's even on that, I don't even know. But they started filling the jar with the big stones all the way to the top. And then the question is this jar full? Folks may say, yeah, that's full. Those big rocks are all the way to the top of that jar. But then you take out a bag full of pebbles, starts to drop those into the jar. Same question: is this jar full? Then pulls out fine gravel, pours that into the jar, and it starts to slide down around the big rocks. And guess what? There's still one more layer: sand. Pouring sand into that jar with the rocks, with the pebbles as well, that it all starts to fill in and completely fill that jar. Now, I want you to just think to yourself, if I had poured the sand into that jar first and then tried to put the big rocks, or then tried to put the pebbles or the smaller stones, would it all fit? Oh, not very likely. The big stones must go in first. Otherwise, the pebbles, the gravel, and the sand will simply fill up that space. And it's the same when thinking about implementation of a prevention strategy. You need to know what the core elements are, or the stones. What are the components of that intervention need your attention the most? Your biggest priority. What needs to come first? What are those rocks, the core elements? Then you can focus on those pebbles, the supplementary aspects of the program that start to fill out the robustness of that intervention. They're a little less crucial, but still very important. And if you have room, you can think about additional complementary components to add to and support the intervention. Now, these are great, but they're not necessary. And if you still have resources to spare, you've got your sand. These are completely bonus to the intervention itself, and you can add those in. But you've got to start with those core elements, those big rocks, when you're moving into implementation. Anything you want to throw in here before I go talk about Project Northland, Nicole?
No, I think that was a fantastic analogy. So thank you, Dave.
Yeah, I like to tell stories, if y'all haven't noticed. But an example here for an individual level, Project Northland. It's a program-focused fidelity tool. There's one official developer, and through their research, they've identified aspects of the program that they believe are necessary to achieve the outcomes. And they've got a Fidelity checklist for Project Northland because it provides the rationale for those core components as well. Do you need to teach all 3 grade levels of Project Northland, or can they be taught independently of one another? Well, let me just tell you, Project Northland, their research shows that students need to hear consistent prevention messaging over several grade levels to achieve those positive outcomes. Thus, all 3 grade levels should be taught to all students. And their curriculum is also sequential. Each grade level builds on the previous ones. So most schools will build this program into their curriculum beginning 6th, adding the 7th, and then 8th grade. What about that peer-led activities, that core element there? Well, most of Project Northland's activities are in fact peer-led, and their research shows that the peers serve as effective sources of information and role models for that positive social behavior. It is important to make the program as peer-led as possible and to train those peer leaders. And it's also very important that the students choose the peer leaders, not the adults. So those are the core components. But then also that not a core component, the pre and post test survey, the developers of Project Northland said it's not a core component. They did say conducting pre and post tests with students isn't necessary for Fidelity, but hey, guess what? Your funder may decide that that survey is important as well. I want to just look at another example. So we can look at Fidelity with strategies that don't have one specific developer or a curriculum for you to follow, which is almost always the case when you think about environmental strategies. So here's an example out of Iowa. So Iowa's Prevention for Success initiative put together this media campaign targeting underage drinking called the What Do You Throw Away campaign. And it was meant for county coalitions to adopt and disseminate. The implementation guide listed that these are their core elements. Coalition, including the representatives from the target audience, needs to identify the media methods, avenues, and locations for the campaign. And they need to create a process to track their campaign's reach as well. So, what would happen if you don't follow these requirements? Well, the media placement might not be in an effective location. It might not be where it needs to be. But here you've got those core elements as well, those big rocks that you need to keep, to put your focus on, your priority on first. So that's what it looks like, big rocks first. Then you add those pebbles. Then you can work up and add some small fine gravel and then the sand. And that's all going to be leading to implementation with Fidelity. And I've got a Google Doc for you. I'm going to put that in the chat box. We're going to go back into breakouts. I'm going to reconfigure them so they'll be a little bit bigger this time. The Google Doc link is in the chat. It is a forced copy, meaning it will have you make a copy of that document so it is yours. You can take notes on it. You don't have to worry about messing up anybody else's notes. You can save it, you can download it and keep it for later as well. And what that Google Doc actually looks like is this. So you see here at the top, we've got activity 1. So for your breakouts, I want you to pick an EBP. We've got some identified here at the top of this Google Doc, and they are hyperlinked. So it will take you to the webpage that talks about that EBP. So let's see how it's redirecting. So in your small group, I want you to identify which of these EBPs you would like to talk about as a group, and then simply review that EBP's information from the website, and then start to jot down, take notes on what are those core elements? What are the supplementary components, those complementary components? And then when it comes to the bonuses, feel free to be creative, brainstorm. If you have resources to spare, if you have the capacity, what else could you add into the jar? What am I missing, Nicole?
Nothing. I would just say, sky's the limit. Pretend that you have an abundant prevention budget as you look over this prevention strategy that you choose. And, obviously you're going to identify core elements and even the supplementary components from the description on the whatever website it takes you to. Then for complementary and bonus, like Dave's talking about, that's where you can start thinking, oh, well, we know that prevention works better when we use multifaceted approaches, right? Not just a singular program or a singular practice. So what might also complement this? Maybe a media campaign. Start thinking a little creatively, and feel free to have some fun with it, especially with the bonus part.
Yes, and while you're in those breakout rooms, it can help if one person shares their screen and you all work through it together, whatever works best for your breakout room. Everybody get in the Google Doc okay? All right. If not, feel free to use the Ask for Help feature, which will be in your Zoom controls when you are in the breakout rooms. I'm going to give you 9 minutes plus a 60-second countdown timer. All right. We'll see you in a few. All right, so there are a few Zoom glitches there. Apologies. I wish we could navigate all of them and make them go away. Just want to do just a quick little report out from each room. Just what did you come up with? And if you didn't get all the way through, that is okay as well. Just fill us in on where you got. Just a 1 to 2 minute report out. And we'll actually start with room 2, followed by room 3, and then room 1. So if you're doing room 2, Jacqueline, Caitlin, Terry, Tommy, Wanda, who wants to just share? What'd you all talk about there? What'd you come up with?
I can, and please feel free to chime in. Anybody who wants to from room 2. I have the doc. So we chose life skills training. And so the core elements that we identified were it's 30 sessions, it's 3 years. It teaches self-management, social skills, and resistance skills, and that it seemed like it needed to be classroom-based. Supplementary components, there's a optional violence prevention program that you can do in addition in the last 2 years during the booster sessions. We could not identify any complementary components. It's a pretty brief description. So maybe somebody else came up with something or had something we didn't, we put someplace else. And then Tommy suggested for bonuses, like a reward celebration for students who had participated would be an example of a bonus.
Yeah. All right. Anything else for room 2? Groovy. Thank you, Terry. And way to go, room 2. All right, so let's hear from room 3. Emma, Kayla, Liz, Mackenzie, Melissa, and Ricardo.
Well, we chose basics for our intervention strategy. The core elements of it is it's cognitive behavioral training aimed at college students ages 18 to 24 who drink heavily, have experienced or are at risk for alcohol-related problems. It's 2 brief interviews with the student, and the I guess the training style is an empathetic, non-confrontational, non-judgmental to students that aim to reduce consumption and its consequences, to help promote healthier choices among young adults, and to provide information and coping skills for risk reduction. So those are the core elements of the program. We thought that possibly a supplementary component would be like a campus-wide social norms campaign to correct some of those misconceptions that students may have, especially those 18-year-olds coming into college. And then a possible complementary component could be some late night programming to provide alternative activities to students that are trying to make better choices.
All right. All right. Anything else, room 3?
Anybody else, feel free to chime in.
All right. I think they're all giving a round of applause. Bravo. Thank you, Melissa. And room 3? Room 1, what you got for Mary, Ryan, Samantha, Sandy?
I can go ahead and speak. I have the document pulled up in front of me. We chose to do life skills training, and I will say I did do a plug for that because I have implemented it before. So core elements of life skills is that it's 30 sessions to be taught over 3 years, 15, 10, and 5 across those 3 years. The major program components teach students personal self-management skills, social skills, and information related to drug use. Skills are taught using instruction, demonstration, feedback, reinforcement, and practice. And sessions are taught sequentially and delivered primarily by classroom teachers. For supplementary components, I put down that like the first core sessions or the first 15 sessions are the core sessions. And then there's 10 booster sessions and 5 in like the 2 like years after that. So like the boosters for that, they just reinforce what you learned in the first 15. So if you, theoretically, if you only did it at like a 6th or 7th grade level and you didn't get that far, like just is what it is, depending on grant stipulations or stuff like that. And then for complementary components, I put that like there's an optional violence prevention session in it. It's not like the core of what like the program is trying to address, but it is like additional and people can use it. And then bonuses, I would also say like doing a celebration or like giving kiddos certificates at the end. But yeah, that's about what I got. I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Room 1? All right. Bravo. Bravo. Thank you, Ryan. And room 1. Rock and roll. Yes. Identifying those core components is oh so vital to implementation with Fidelity. But hey, what happens when, well, what are some pitfalls, some things you might need to look out for as you're really striving to implement with Fidelity? You identify those core components. You know what those big rocks are. What do y'all need to be on the lookout for? Well, what would you recommend for Fidelity pitfalls?
Are you just wanting us to unmute?
Oh, I'm throwing it to Nicole.
Okay.
I think she was looking for the unmute.
So yeah, this is a great question. I mean, I see several folks here in the room. Sandy, I don't know if you remember me, but I remember you from Nebraska system. So I know your experience will really come in handy here. Think about a time when you have implemented a program maybe for a very, very long time, and you've noticed the fidelity is not what it used to be, right, in the delivery. So if we move to the next slide, this is called fidelity drift, right? So over time, you become really comfortable. It feels like second nature. You take for granted some of the components of a program, and suddenly that fidelity that you were adhering to so closely, especially at the beginning, it starts slipping and slipping and slipping. And when we have when we have certain fidelity pitfalls like fidelity drift, it's so important to consider at the outset of implementation, right? Trying to think ahead, what might occur. And fidelity drift is probably the most common issue with fidelity, especially for long-term programs. You know, we have 5-year grants we often operate in. By year 4 and 5, people are thinking about other things and less so about delivering perfectly. So something to consider for sure at the outset. It's very easy to grow comfortable, as we said, especially from what you might have learned initially. And this also kind of emphasizes the importance of having recap trainings, refreshers, how implementation should go. If you think about the game of telephone, if you have new staff coming in and taking over an implementer's role, or somebody's overseeing an environmental strategy project, they will oftentimes turn to who was delivering that previously, or any kind of documentation that might have been provided. And if that's not really solid in preparing somebody, then it's kind of like the game of telephone, right? So you really have to make sure that implementation guidelines are set up, and that staff turnover and even stakeholder turnover is accounted for when you're constantly monitoring your program's delivery and fidelity. And then we want to continue to emphasize and measure how that program is being implemented so that you can determine if this fidelity drift thing is happening. And fidelity drift leads to implementation gaps, and that's why it is a problem. Obviously, that makes pretty good sense, right? So you create this gap in implementation, you're way less likely to achieve the desirable outcomes that you chose that strategy for in the first place. So staff turnover and other personnel changes, those are key items or key occurrences to be aware of, as well as adaptations. So we almost always have to make some kind of adaptation, and we'll talk a little bit more about the really good kinds to make, those green light adaptations. But when adaptations are made on the fly, or they're not done well, or they're not done according to how you've planned to adapt, that can really lead to a big implementation gap, especially when we think about reducing something from a program, right? So subtracting something from a program. And you want to be thinking about sustainability. I mean, this all ties in to how well you're able to replicate what you did to get to a desirable outcome. Or if you don't achieve that desirable outcome, if you have the documentation in place and you have a record or the knowledge that something wasn't delivered with fidelity or appropriately, then you can tie that as one of the contributing factors to not achieving your outcomes, right? So being able to make those mid-course corrections, or even, if you're applying to another grant and you want to do things a little bit differently, those kind of justifications are important, and planning around how you're going to avoid fidelity pitfalls. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So we're talking about adaptations and how pivotal they are to plan and implement appropriately. So it's almost like you need to have fidelity to the adaptations that you that you plan. What are some reasons that you have had to make adaptations in your work? And it doesn't have to be prevention work. We're going to launch a poll here. Just be thinking about your experience, times where you've had to pivot, where you've had to make a shift, where you have had to make a decision on the fly, or perhaps prepare entirely around. So take this poll. Dave just dropped the link in the chat box.
Going to be the same exact link that we used last time for WooClap, although now we've got the next question up. And if you want to see the how to participate, here's that QR code again if you need to grab it.
And you should be able to select multiple answers. So anything that applies,
Yes.
anytime that you have made an adaptation, whether in your prevention work or in other lines of work, we want to know what experiences you've had.
All right. There, they're coming in now. I like it. I like it. Nicole, I couldn't edit the colors for this. The contrast is kind of tough to see, isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit.
Hopefully y'all can see it when you pull up the link. It's not too bad. Are you able to read those from your screen though?
Yeah, I'm thankful.
Okay.
Thank you for checking. That's great. Okay, well, if you have a chance to fill out the poll and you want to take a look, that's great. We're gonna move along. Looks like the most, oops, can you go back to that, Dave, really quick? The most common answer is the people constraints. And again, this is going back to that staff turnover. We saw this so pronounced during COVID, which of course we're still going through the pandemic, but staff turnover and even turnover among like our key stakeholders, right? You have a great relationship with the school superintendent, and you've got this program happening across multiple schools, and now all of a sudden that superintendent is gone and you have to build your whole case again for the next school year to get back in there. And then there's training of teachers, and there's so many elements that can be impacted by the people aspect. The other one that we see here are the time constraints. Again, most likely, many of you are thinking about the school-based environment in which we deliver prevention programs quite often. Teachers need that class time. So yeah, time constraints, these are all things to be considering and to plan around. And the best way that you can plan around what kind of adaptations you need to make is to have a very comprehensive community needs assessment during the SPIF assessment phase. If you're getting input from your community members, if you're assessing what capacity and the 4 R's of capacity you have in your community, right? That's the resources, readiness. What else is it? Your grant requirements. What's the 4th R, Dave? You know, we came up with this a few weeks ago. But if those elements of capacity are not identified, it's going to be really hard to decide how you need to, thanks Dave, dropping that in the chat. It's going to be really hard to determine how you might need to really shift or tailor your approach to any of your prevention programs. So SPIF assessment step, crucial, and crucial for making adaptations. So let's go back to the slide deck. Yes, fantastic, thank you so much. And what do we need to know about adaptations to avoid compromising the effectiveness of your prevention strategy that you selected, program, practice, or policy? So let's go into the next slide. We're going to just define adaptations in a very simple mathematical terms by additions, deletions, or substitutions. So when you're making any kind of modification, any kind of change, it's an adaptation. And there's very, very good adaptations and very, very necessary adaptations. And it's very common because not all communities are the same, right? So additions are the most preferred. And almost always you will be green lighted, buzzword Dave will tell you about in just a second, you'll be green lighted to make those additions. So if you need to add on modules or you want to pair up, you know, delivering LST, life skills, with an additional module or a supplementary, you know, violence prevention was what Ryan mentioned earlier. That's an addition. That is going to be green lighted. That is not going to compromise the potential for effectiveness that life skills curriculum delivered with Fidelity would provide. Now, when you start cutting things away or changing things out, like substitutions and deletions, that's when it can get a little tricky and a little hairy. And that's when you are jeopardizing your effectiveness and compromising some core elements. So we're going to be thinking about deletions and substitutions in just a minute. And I am going to turn it over to Dave. Oh, actually, I'm going to go over one more slide. Sorry. And yes, thanks, Dave. It's definitely a balance between function and fit, for sure, with your community and their needs. So this slide's really important, and we did want to include this in here because how the adaptation process looks, again, will rely heavily on that assessment phase, getting community input, you know, having really a solid understanding of needs and what kind of tailoring needs to occur, as well as a solid understanding of your evidence-based program, practice, or policy. And you know, you can't get too much information about your program, practice, or policy, especially if it's an environmental strategy. Dave kind of alluded to that earlier. You know, with school-based prevention curricula, it's pretty simple to know what exactly you need to do because there's an implementation guide. The developer, the program developer, has put together guidance documents and other sort of resources, and you have to go through training to be certified, right? There's a lot of preparation that takes place, and of course, peer-reviewed research articles that talk about the program. For environmental strategies, those are a little bit more tricky to find solid step-by-step implementation guidance. But taking the time to think through that and then also considering your community and the practical fit for your community is going to be a game changer. And those of you who are pretty experienced in this realm know exactly what I'm talking about. It's worth that time at the beginning to plan if you can. So this slide's important because you'll see that as you get lower on this list of example adaptations, Fidelity drops, right? So as you're making major adaptations, reinventing the program, reinventing the wheel, you are drastically changing the program and compromising its fidelity. That's not necessarily a bad thing if your community calls for it, but what do you also need to be doing then? Very rigorous documentation, work closely with somebody who can provide evaluation guidance, who can really help that process evaluation component, so you can then tie whatever outcomes you do achieve back to what you did, since it's so different from the program. So something to be thinking about in your planning. And I'm going to turn over to Dave now to talk about green light, red light, and yellow light adaptations.
Yes, and we're going to talk about documentation again because it is oh so important. But yes, when we continue to talk about adaptations, you may have scrolled ahead on that Google Doc and you have a little glimpse into an upcoming activity, but it's all around adaptations. Green light adaptations is where we're going to start. So green light adaptations, they're minor adaptations and they're more superficial to your EBP and mostly just to make it fit your population, to increase the reach or the participation. Like you could tailor or update content such as statistics or use other names or colors, pictures, or wording. You might also adapt the recruitment for your priority population, such as using more active strategies, a direct approach rather than a more passive approach. So they're just minor adaptations that probably can be modified without limiting the effectiveness of your EBP. So those are green light adaptations. Let's go, right? Well, what's next? Be the yellow light adaptations. So yellow light adaptations are adaptations of methods and of content. But instead of deletion or contradiction, you use an addition of methods, an addition of content. And some environmental strategy guys may even have suggestions of these yellow and green light adaptations. But want you to be cautious with adapting the delivery mechanisms. An example would be like the influence of strategy implementers may go through several pathways. When it's a peer or a key person, this may create receptivity. We might unconsciously tailor messages if you do that. But on the other hand, expertise of health professionals might have played an important role as well. So you want to be cautious around adapting the delivery mechanisms. All right. And then you also want to be careful when you change the delivery format and always try to keep the elements of the strategy that fit. All right. So went too far. Yeah, there we go. All right. So now red light adaptations. Screeching on those brakes. Don't want to run that red light because you get pulled over, get a citation, cause an accident. Those are the adaptations that change the methods used or delete content or changing or contradicting behaviors or content that is addressed. Now, these adaptations are ideas that they're not really recommended. Now, it might seem like it was required to ensure the reach or ensure the receptivity or effectiveness or feasibility. They're not recommended. It's that red light. We got to hit the brakes. So when you have a red light adaptation in mind, try to turn it into a yellow light adaptation. Or maybe suggest going back to your EBPs, the basic fit, to see whether another EBP might be more suitable. You don't want to change the theoretical underpinnings or mechanisms of change within that EBP. You don't want to change the health topic or behaviors addressed. You don't want to add activities that contradict or take away from the original EBP's goals. You don't want to delete whole sections or major activities. Reducing the duration or reducing the dose. Those all are those red light adaptations where you just gotta hit the brakes and see if you can take it into a yellow light adaptation, or even pivot and bring in a different EBP that might be a better fit. Anything you want to add to red light, green light adaptations, Nicole?
No, I think you're doing a fantastic job, and you chose fantastic imagery for folks to know. Also, your former campus cop is showing with the red light citations.
Right, exactly. I couldn't help it. I couldn't help it. So those red light, yellow light, green light adaptations are one type, but you may also need to make another kind of adaptation, such as a cultural adaptation. Now, these are systematic modifications of your EBP or the protocol that's done in a way to make it more compatible with your focus population or audience's cultural patterns, meanings, and values. Ultimately, the goal of cultural adaptation is to ensure that the prevention strategies are effective in realizing those intended behavioral outcomes among all of the intervention's participants or audience. When making cultural adaptations, the strategy's core elements still need to remain intact. Say that again, the strategy's core elements still need to remain intact during the implementation process. Now, cultural adaptations should always be made in collaboration with the communities, the groups from which the participants will be recruited or will be reached. Cultural adaptation should always be made in collaboration with the communities and groups from which the participants will be recruited or reached. And this is just one proposed model for making cultural adaptations. And it's a continuum from no adaptations to those that are culturally grounded and truly reflective of a cultural worldview, and place the culture and the social context of the intended population at the center of the intervention. Now, at that low end of the continuum are the evidence-based strategies that are implemented without any cultural adaptations. Here, strategies are considered appropriate for all audiences. They don't require adaptations or culturally adapted versions of the program or strategies. They may already be available for those audiences as well. And then moving up that continuum to surface or structural adaptations. Those are when the intervention only requires just minor adjustments, such as changes to images, language, or terms. Now, most adaptations in prevention fall here. You can make a huge impact by making these minor adjustments for your culture, for your audience, you're making these adjustments with those folks. And when you move to the deep structural adaptations, this is going to involve more substantial changes to reflect the complex cultural elements tied to the core elements of that intervention. Now, you've got to be deliberate in your attempt to infuse cultural worldviews, values, beliefs into the core elements of the strategy. And this this step in the continuum can be rather time consuming, and it's going to require very close collaboration with the communities or the populations which your strategies, your EBPs are intended. These adaptations can significantly improve engagement, such as the importance of recognizing tribal identities and cultures whereas social pressures related to assimilation and discrimination have been found to be important adaptations for strategies that serve, that intended to reach Native American populations. Now, those culturally grounded adaptations incorporate activities, materials, approaches that emerge from the culture where the strategy will be implemented. Now, these are going to be most closely connected to values, behaviors, norms of that focused population. And they may be necessary when no empirically validated programs are available for that specific population, for that specific audience as well. Anything you want to add in on this one, Nicole, before I move to our next slide?
No, this is great. I did drop the reference in the chat box, which provides, more guidance and more information about this. But it's an excellent continuum for us to be considering.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I can't stress enough, adaptations are made with the communities, the audiences that will be engaged, that the EBPs are intended to reach with, because prevention is better together. How many times have I said that so far? All right. So lastly, I want to look at the stages of cultural adaptation. Now, this image here is going to represent the process that you'll want to go through in order to make those cultural adaptations. Now, as you can tell here, it's a multi-stage process that involves gathering information, collaborative planning, pilot testing, and implementation, as well as performance monitoring and evaluation as well. But you don't want to skip any of these steps. They are oh so important. Don't take shortcuts. Don't take shortcuts here. Anything else you want to add?
I was going to type it in the chat box,
Yeah.
but if you are going to make a cultural adaptation or any adaptation for that matter, it's really important to be thinking about quality improvement processes. And that's something that we could definitely dive into at another time and send some resources out for it. But a really great QI tool is the PDSA cycle. Some of you might be quite familiar with that. It's Plan, Do, Study, Act, or Plan, Do, Check, Act. And that is an excellent methodology to follow, very simple, for making adaptations and piloting them before widespread implementation. So be thinking about QI tools to use if you're going to make adaptations.
Rockin'. Yes, and you know how we love our acronyms in prevention. Gotta love them. Gotta love them. Oop. Got a little click happy there. All right, so here's what we're doing. We're going back into breakouts. Same breakout, same group. Want you to brainstorm examples of those red light and green light. Don't worry about the yellow, just the red and green light adaptations. And then this one, this second bullet here, I get very passionate about this one. I can get very fired up, but I'll keep it short and sweet. But I feel we can often forget about, we don't take time to intentionally think about what might be the unintended consequences as a result of making changes of these adaptations. What might those unintended consequences be? If you had hindsight's 2020, so imagine you're standing at the end of the day after, hey, we've implemented, we're done, you're looking back. What things might you notice? What could be some of those unintended consequences? And I'll put the Google Doc link back up. I think we had some folks that maybe got kicked out and some other folks that maybe joined after the last breakout. But as you scroll down on that Google Doc, here's your activity. Use that same EBP that y'all identified before. and just come up with some of the green light, red light adaptations, and then some of those possible unintended consequences. All right, let me set these breakout rooms up real quick. We're gonna give you 10 minutes to dig into these. All right, and questions before we go? All right, there's a lot of wisdom in the room, y'all. Enjoy. We'll see you in a few. All right, welcome back, everybody. Want to just take another quick 1 to 2 minute report out. Would love to hear from each room on what were some of those adaptations that you identified, and I'm really curious about what some of those unintended consequences you may have identified you came up with. So this round we'll go with room 3, room 2, and then room 1. So room 3, Delaney, Emma, Kayla, and Melissa. What'd you guys talk about?
Well, for our green light adaptations, we chose basics as our strategy. So we were thinking that usually basics is kind of like a student that's already gotten into trouble. So now that they're having to go to the counseling center or something and get some additional help. But we were thinking that it might be a nice prevention measure for like a Greek organization, for like the whole organization that's maybe been identified as high risk or has a history of issues, just as a kind of preventive education type thing. And then possibly having RAs take the training as well. That way they could be aware of like the brief motivational interviewing theories and possibly help identify students that would need some additional interventions or who are high risk. One of the unintended consequences of having the RAs do that is there could be some confidentiality issues with having them have that sort of knowledge or talking amongst themselves about students, things like that. Another green light would be having a translator available to ensure that all students have access to the same resources, excuse me, and they can communicate in their preferred language. And then a location change to ensure confidentiality, not just having this held at a counseling center so everybody knows the students going in there are going in there for some sort of counseling, but possibly offering an alternative and non-obvious meeting space like a conference room in their residence hall or, you know, the cafeteria, somewhere like that that's still confidential, but so that they don't have to feel self-conscious about going for counseling. The red light adaptations would be holding it in group sessions rather than one-on-ones, because then you kind of I guess you break confidentiality, but also you probably won't get as great of an interaction with a student as you would, you know, they wouldn't be more open to sharing as they would in a one-on-one session. And then potential issues with changing the number or length of the sessions, like they don't want to do 2 sessions, they want to cram it all into 1 session, or they don't have time for a 2-hour session, so they want to stretch it out over 4 sessions, you know, things like that could cause some issues. It could change the effectiveness of it, and the students may not get out of it what the intent was. So those were our adaptations.
Yeah, all right. All right, round of applause for room 3, and thank you, Melissa, for sharing that with the group. Marvelous, marvelous. Getting some applause from folks. All right, room 2. Jacqueline, Caitlin, Terry, Tommy, and Wanda. How'd your
Sure.
conversation go?
Good. So we chose life skills training, and some of our green light adaptations were location change, like from a classroom to an after school setting or someplace outside of the school, translating into needed languages, either on the fly or actually translating, having different facilitators potentially, and then cultural sensitivity. So adjusting material to be appropriate for your population. Our red light ones were not delivering one of the 3 content areas, spreading the content out like more than it's meant to be, like across multiple years, more than 3 years or whatever, or condensing sessions into fewer sessions, and then having untrained facilitators and changing the target age. So our unintended consequences were We might lose content if it's not translated carefully. You can't always do a one-for-one translation. Reduce the flow if we change facilitators. Some populations really need that structure and consistency. It's important. Might lose the attention of students, and might maybe distractions if it's not delivered in the suggested location, and we might not have all the materials we need depending on what that location change is. We also might ruin the effectiveness for some of our red light adaptations, and then might damage a relationship if we had untrained facilitators, and ruin any further chance we have of that partnership.
Yeah. All right. Folks, let's give room 2 and Terry a round of applause. Marvelous. Thank you very much. Great work, y'all. Hey, and Ryan, I see you coming on camera. Does that mean you're reporting out for room 1?
You bet, back again.
Bring it on.
I have afternoon brain, so bear with me. As far like EVPs, we did life skills in the first one, so we're carrying that over, obviously. Some green light adaptations, I would say like adjustments to scheduling that are flexible with the school without dropping those core units. So for example, if you're working with a school that has to have X amount of education time and then someone else coming in, being flexible and working with that without like getting rid of the core content and like the areas. Something else I said a green light to was like the additional violence prevention courses, like the 3 ones. If the school is really interested in that and like you are able to offer that, like I would say that's a green light. Another thing that I would say is that when we're like, if you're working with different grade levels across schools, for example, maybe one school wants to do a 5th grade program and another school wants to do like 6th grade. So working with that and then making sure like the messages you're trying to convey are health literate and appropriate for the age of the students you're working with. So just thinking about those, like some green lights, that possible unintended consequences of that. As far as scheduling goes, being flexible rather than compromising. I would say like an unintended consequence of that is it could put some stress on the person planning that. Like obviously we want to get into schools, have this programming, but it can be hard on the planning end and trying to figure it out and go through all those ropes. Yeah, and then I guess red lights, some things that I wrote down is sharing materials without setting guidelines. I'm relatively new to the field, but I will say like in my first year, we would do things with schools. Like I've done life skills before. We've shared content with like educators and we'll share like presentations or materials that we use. And I think that there was one school where a teacher might have been using that outside of what we did. So making sure that the guidelines are set and what's expected with that material being shared, condensing a schedule and like cutting out lessons, because then you're getting rid of fidelity and you're not teaching what's expected. Another thing too, turnover's kind of big in the field that we work in. So making sure that the staff that you have is trained in it and is not like prevention's very niche, I will say. So like if you don't have that knowledge base, you have the danger of potentially spreading misinformation. So like considering those things, I would say like if the fidelity is not adhered to, it can change the program that you're saying you're going to offer. And then it's going to in turn affect the long-term effectiveness. And also thinking about it from a funding perspective, if someone is funding you to do those things and you're not necessarily following it with fidelity, like that's a big no-no. Like it could cut your funding stream. But yeah, that's what I got. I don't know if anyone wants to add in, but a little tangenty at the end, but we got it there.
Yes, marvelous. Round of applause. And I just got to point out too, did you notice everybody kind of had different perspectives? They thought about different red and green light and unintended consequences. That's why it's so important to have multiple stakeholders, different perspectives at your table from the beginning. This doesn't all fall on one person's shoulders. So definitely a lot of value in having multiple folks involved. All right. So we're starting to wind down. We're starting to land this plane. And Nicole's gonna pick it right back up here on monitoring implementation.
Yes, and I do want to acknowledge that we have a limited time left and be respectful of that. So we're going to try to move through this section pretty quickly. I want to assure you that you're going to get a copy of these slides. You can always reach out for additional notes, and there'll be an additional resource sent out related to implementation monitoring as well that I will get over to Dave and Steve today that I think will be helpful. So let's move to the next slide where how do we monitor our implementation? And this is really process evaluation. Implementation science is your process evaluation. For those of you who have completed a substance abuse and prevention skills training, we talk about this a little bit in that standardized training, but process evaluation is really getting to, did you do what you said you were going to do, right? And the only way you know that, or a funder might know that, or your other staff might know that, is by documenting. So you determine in the planning step the what and the how of your process evaluation before you get started. Very important to lay your infrastructure for those kind of process evaluation data collection components. And then, you want to be thinking about this in a very formal way, meaning in your logic model, you actually dedicate space to consider process evaluation components as well as your outcome evaluation components. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. And of course, all of this feeds sustainability for very straightforward reasons. Again, the more you implement with fidelity and appropriately for your community, right, conceptual and practical fit, the more likely you are to achieve outcomes. And that makes your program so much easier to sell and so much easier to gain momentum and continue on. So let's look at the logic model for just a second. We've seen this one. Those of you who joined us for session 2, you saw this as well. We kind of worked through these different pillars of the standard logic model template, we'll say, right? And you find out the first 3 boxes are really identified during your assessment and capacity phases of the SPIF process. And then of course, in the planning phases, when you put it all together and you identify which prevention strategies you should select that are evidence-based and fit conceptually correctly. And then what? Then you move into implementation. But before you do that, it's important to think through the rest of the SPIF process. So moving on to the next slide, the logic model gets bigger. It doesn't need to get bigger than this. This is pretty comprehensive, but you do want to account for process outputs, your short-term outcomes, and your intermediate outcomes. The process evaluation piece, again, is going back to what Ryan had pointed out, that you want to be able to be accountable to your funders. And if you didn't document something, you didn't do it according to them, right? So this is the piece that really ties into prevention strategies. Now you'll see these little arrows that Dave's going to pop up on the screen here. One more, actually, I think 2 more. Yeah, it's easier that way. So you'll notice for eval, your intervening variables, the risk and protective factors that you're trying to address, those are evaluated based on intermediate outcomes, such as a biennial, every other year, survey among youth, or some other community survey that you're doing every 2-3 years or so, right? Intermediate outcomes. Your contributing factors, those contextual variables that occur, those can be measured in a much shorter instance, such as 1 month ago, we didn't have an MOU, we didn't have a certain practice in place for community events, and now we do. And what are the short-term outcomes from those? And then your prevention strategies, these are directly evaluated from a process lens based on some of these implementation science best practices, like what was the dose that was delivered? How complete was fidelity adhered to? What was your reach and dose received? And we'll go over those 4 different components a little bit further. So don't stress about those too much right now. So here's an example of a logic model that would be completed. This is complex enough to share with stakeholders. Of course, on the back end, you're going to want more information. You're going to want data. You're going to want the how-tos. But this is just an example of underage drinking being your problem. You want to address social access. You're doing that by considering older peers in the community are handing off beer at community events. So you're targeting that with alcohol restrictions at community events. And your process outputs are the numbers things. They're the things that you did, the things that immediately resulted from your your strategy implementation. And then you'll see short-term and intermediate outcomes are really looking at the knowledge, skills, abilities, attitudes, perceptions in your community. And those long-term lead to behavior change. But this, you can't have, you can't replicate very well, and you really can't have justification for those outcome measures without the process piece and this very robust documentation. So let's go on to the next slide. Documenting, pivotal. Again, didn't document, didn't do, right? Heard that from a wonderful epidemiologist, Beverly Tremaine. She works for the Southwest PTDC, and that has stuck in my brain for years because it's so accurate. So these are the four, we'll say the really four aspects to implementation monitoring that need to be documented and tracked and measured on a regular basis, annually, documenting regularly, so that you can determine how well you did what you said you were going to do. So that's dose delivered, and dose delivered really has to do with the completeness. So if Life Skills has 137 sessions, but you only delivered 100 of them, that's something to track and monitor. And then of course, Fidelity. So how well you delivered those 100 sessions, and how closely you stuck to the core components within each of those curricula. And of course, Fidelity assessments and rubrics. Those are so tremendously helpful. Much easier to get from a out of the box program, right? Like a typical after school curricula or in school curricula, much more difficult to find for environmental strategies. But if you can put together guidance or secure guidance, or you have questions about a particular strategy that you're considering or working with, I know I would be more than happy to help try to round up some resources for Fidelity assessments and rubrics for those. Reach, this has to do with how well you're actually reaching the folks that you intend to reach, your focused population, how strong is participation. And we'll show you a little tiny formula to calculate that. And then dose received really has to do with how participants are participating, are satisfied, are really engaged in whatever strategy it is that you're doing. So dose received means different things according to the strategy, obviously. So let's go through, I'm gonna take you through the first one and then hand it over to Dave. So for your implementation plan, or your monitoring plan, really, looking at dose delivered is pretty pivotal and tied very closely with Fidelity for pretty clear purposes. For individual level strategies, here are the questions that you're asking. You're asking what exactly is implemented, and you're figuring out the extent of all the parts of the program or practice that's delivered. Now, environmental level strategies, say compliance checks for alcohol serving, or RBST training, or trying to implement a social host ordinance, or trying to, get interlock devices installed in vehicles as a mandatory procedure after DUIs. When you're looking at dose delivered for environmental level, you're really looking at completeness of your effort and the extent to which individuals in your environment, so your focused population, are aware of this change in their environment. Are they aware of the new policy, the new law, a new practice? Now when they go to community events, there's a beer garden and IDs are checked and there's a security officer. So how well are our community members aware and willing to consider these pieces? So their awareness isn't necessary, but it's really, it's a very good thing to achieve. All right, let's go on. Oh, Fidelity, we'll do that one real quick. We've talked about Fidelity a lot. This is all just about measuring quality, and you can see the differences here between individual level and environmental level. Again, individual level, out of the box sort of packaging typically tends to reflect the mode of delivery. You want to make sure that it's matching up your philosophical, the conceptual approach of that program. Environmental level is really about, it's more concrete in like, was something installed? Was something performed? Is something now in writing, right? So you have almost like a deliverable, an end product at the environmental level. All right. And I think that
My
is you.
turn. Yes, my turn. All right. Just got to drive home the fact that fidelity is rarely a yes or no. You're not going to necessarily be able to check a box off, mark, and yes, fidelity, especially when it comes to environmental strategies. They can be rather elusive. But like we had talked about earlier, adaptation and fidelity are two sides of the same coin. It comes to that balancing act there between adaptation and fidelity, especially when it comes to environmental strategies. So you have to really dig into it and be intentional about how you monitor fidelity. And you're going to get these slides again. So all of these questions will be there for you, what you should look at. When it comes to the reach, individual level, how many individuals are exposed to it? Depending on the project focus, reach can be defined in different ways, but it's usually conceptualized as the proportion of the individuals within the focus population who are reached, as reflected by attendance at sessions or certain events. But it can also measure who is exposed to specific elements of the intervention, such as media messages. And that magic formula is the individuals participating as your numerator and the possible individuals in the focus population. So that's how you can represent the reach. Don't forget about that denominator, the bottom number, as far as the possible individuals in that focus population. It's one thing to say, yeah, we had 27 folks attend. Great, but out of how many possible attendees? You got to really put that perspective on it to calculate your true reach. When it comes to the dose received, the exposed here, it's traditionally defined at that individual level, but it can also pertain to the environmental or organizational level as well. Individual level, it's the extent in which participants actively engaged with, interacted with the materials. It can be initial or continued use. It can be their immediate reactions. But when it comes to environmental level, it can be a lot different. It's dose received may pertain to the change agent's response to the training and their role in planning, program policy, or practice changes, including engaging in expected follow-up activities as well, such as what extent did change agents who are exposed to training form an action team after returning to their organizations as recommended during that training. So that's just one example. And again, you'll have these slides that have all of these bullet points for you. But last but not least, in all three of our sessions, we had nuggets of how to feed sustainability. So we wanted to just capture and put all of those nuggets here in one spot for you. EBPs are easier to sell. They're more likely to yield those desirable outcomes. They've been done before. You're also going to align your program, your initiative with that public health approach that we know and love so much. And then of capacity, resources, readiness, restrictions, and requirements. Then you're going to have the appropriate selection of your EBPs, both that conceptual fit and practical fit. Is it something stakeholders will support? And is it culturally relevant, respectful, and responsive? That logic model, got to really just drum roll for that one, drive that one home, because that shows how your work is linked to your stated outcomes. Did you do what you said you were going to do? And of course, implementing with fidelity. When it's implemented without fidelity, it's going to reduce the likelihood of achieving the outcomes, which in turn is going to reduce your chance at sustainability as well. And then, of course, monitored implementation, that process evaluation and outcome. Document, document, document. Didn't document it, you didn't do it. That is how implementing with fidelity will feed into your sustainability. Nicole, anything you want to throw on top of that?
I think that was a wonderful way to wrap up the series, and just thank you to everybody who's participated, and we hope you take some nuggets back to your teams. Please feel free to reach out if there's other resources or questions that you're looking to answer.
All comes down to prevention is better together, and together we are stronger. Mr. Steve, the microphone is yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Dave. Thanks everyone for being here today. Dave put up on the screen there. If you've got your phone handy, you can snap the QR code, or there is a link in the chat for the IPRA. We'd love for your post-evaluation of this process. This is SAMHSA's way of verifying we hosted the event, and the more data they can gather, the better. So we'd appreciate you indulging us in filling out the evaluation. Just takes a few moments. Thanks again, Dave. Thanks, Nicole. Very glad that you both are here. And if you can join us next Thursday for our community of practice on workforce and leadership development, Dave Clausen will be our drill sergeant for that one, right?
Just another conversation. We're going to be learning from each other. All right. Thank you, everybody. Don't be a stranger. Always happy to help, because together is better.